every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
You need the right people in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you have the right people in the right place, but at the wrong time.
I've got to keep going forward. I've got to keep looking for revenue streams. I've got to keep looking for growth, keep looking at new ways of doing things.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development program I don't really want to be here.
Scaling a business is not necessarily that easy. If it were, we wouldn't have the vast majority of businesses remaining below 10 employees. However, there are some sound principles of successfully scaling a business, and the really good news is that those principles are intrinsically linked with building a valuable business. So that means that if we're building a scalable business, then we're also building a valuable business. If you'd like to understand more about those principles and access a range of resources to help you in your scale-up journey, then why not take a look at www.bizsmarts.co.uk. That's BizSmarts, BIZSMARTS. On this episode of ScaleUp Radio, we have a presentation and a panel discussion around the idea of checklists. And now that may sound really simple and straightforward, but we look at a different aspect, a different way of looking at the idea of checklists and the power of how they can be used really effectively. And we also look specifically at some checks that we have developed to help businesses that are scaling up to make sure that they're doing the right things and keeping a check on things. And we call those our InFlight Checks. And, the process, that term might be a little bit alien to you, but it's something that we encourage our business owners to do on a regular basis to make sure that they are thinking about the right things as they scale up and that they're not missing things. This presentation looks at the benefits of those in-flight checks and checklists in general. This presentation looks at the benefits of checklists and those in-flight checks in particular, and the power that help shape both the present and the future of your business. We also talk about how checklists isn't necessarily just to be done by the business owner. In fact, the real power of them is when we get the rest of the team involved and we can see how different people are perceiving different aspects of things that we're doing. And if you think about checks within the airline industry, it's often the co-pilot that is reading out the checks and the pilot that is performing them, so that there's that balance, that checks and balance that's going on there. There's also some great practical advice about how often you should be performing the in-flight checks, where other checklists might be appropriate within your business. And then we also have that panel discussion with a group of great business owners that are using the in-flight checks, but also other checklists within their businesses. So you're seeing the practical aspects of it, not just what the textbooks might say, if you like. You'll also hear a lot of talk about tools, about those in-flight checks. And if you'd like to find out more about how getting access to those, and perhaps to some of the software that we have behind the in-flight checks, then there's a link in the show notes for you to contact us. This month is around something called the InFlight Checks. This is our own InFlight Checks based on some really sound thinking from lots of people, a lot cleverer than us. But we've collated it into a kind of a checklist that enables us to see where some of the gaps are, see where some of the weaknesses are in our journey on scaling up around those 4 pillars of scaling up. And why do we think this is important? Why do we need to do anything like this at all? Well, essentially, only around about 4% of businesses in this country do scale up beyond the 10 employee level, or roughly £1 million sort of turnover. And that's the typical level at which a business is likely to be able to make us as the owners really financially secure. So it's a big milestone to get to. And we certainly, part of what we're about is understanding some of the reasons why not everybody either gets there or gets beyond there, but also then helping people to want to achieve that. And one of the things that we've done recently is a Scale Up Challenges report, and you can certainly contact us and ask us to send all the details through to that. But we identified essentially 5 key conclusions as to why people don't scale up. Within the report itself, we then teased out a lot of the specific challenges that people have at those different stages of that scale up journey. And as well as some of these things like desire and confidence to do it, but understanding around the personality and the leadership requirements of growing a larger business, there's that understanding what it really takes to scale. And it's not just that awareness, but it's about understanding that journey, and then focusing on culture, team engagement, and overcoming that chicken and the egg idea with, if we knew that the business was going to return a huge amount of money to us, then we'd put in a lot of money at the beginning if we had to invest to do it. But of course, if we're not sure that it's going to be a return, then we're a bit hesitant to put the money in. So there's that confidence and the idea of the owner's trap. But one of the key things that separates those of us or those that succeed from those that don't are around habits, essentially, and good habits. So really great ideas in business clearly help. That moment of inspiration or something that you're doing that's really special, that's different. But without strong habits, good habits within the business, then we're unlikely to be able to capitalize on those ideas. But you don't actually, in business, to be successful, have to have an idea that nobody else has thought of. If you simply are really good at some of the fundamental basics of the business, of the sort of things we would call the habits, then you can separate yourself out from the majority of businesses and then should be able to succeed. So it's not just about having great ideas. It's really fundamental to get these world-class basics, as people in the sports world talk about it. So world-class fundamentals, world-class basics are quite commonly talked about in team sports like rugby and football, in getting those really basic skills and habits absolutely perfect, as well as then maybe the occasional moment of superb talent. And there's a couple of really good books to read, and one in particular, there's one called Atomic Habits, and it's about tiny changes leading to remarkable results, and that's by a gentleman called James Clear, Atomic Habits. So if anybody wants to read up a little bit more on that, then that's certainly something to do. So I'm going to introduce you to the idea of checklists before I get into our specific one about the InFlight checks. And a checklist may sound a basic thing, but they're used increasingly now in all sorts of different aspects. Though anybody that's familiar with the medical world or the flying world will know that they're beginning to be used all the time. In fact, the flying world has used them ever since pretty much people started flying. And it's not because people aren't clever enough to get things right on their own. It's because as the complexity of our world increases and our collective knowledge essentially has exceeded the capacity of any individual to get things right all the time, however clever we might be or might think we are, or we might think our people are, we need to have some checklists to make sure that we don't miss things and things don't get overlooked. And there's another great book here from a chap called Atul Gawande, and it's called the Checklist Manifesto. And he looks in there at the power of checklists and how they can, particularly in the medical world, they save lives. So you've got very highly qualified medics, but even they make mistakes and they forget to do things. And if they've got a checklist that's been pre-sorted through, and ideally there's somebody else that is getting them to do that checklist, so it's not just one person that's kind of going, oh yeah, I've done all those things, but it's actually there's a double check on it, if you like, then it can make a powerful difference. Granger, I don't know whether you wanted to pitch in here and say anything about the checklist idea.
Yeah, so the checklist is a very powerful technique. It's used an awful lot in the quality world as well. So when we're looking at our processes and looking at our systems, again, it's very easy to forget and miss some things. So using a checklist with your teams to remember that everything is done before the work is dispatched or sent or finished for the customer is a very powerful activity. And the Checklist Manifesto, as Kevin said, is a great book. I highly recommend it in terms of reading. And one of the other powers of the checklist is it's usually read out by somebody else in the team. So it's not read by the leader. It's somebody else in the team taking ownership and calling it out. And that way you get a real power of it. And that's the true benefit of getting a checklist to work within teams.
So if you think about the airline pilot here, thank you, Granger. Think about the airline pilot. Then you've typically got the second in command that is potentially reading out those checklists. And I come from a flying background early in my career in the Air Force, and we'd have checks for everything. So you'd have your walk around checks outside of the aircraft before you even get in the aircraft. You've then got your pre-start checks once you're sat in the cockpit, and you would go through all those various things, and you have a number of checks. And some of those checks you're simply reading out from a checklist. You've literally got a flip chart, a flip booklet with all those checks on. Others, then you're expected to know off by heart. So clearly, when you have an engine failure, you don't really want to be hunting around for the appropriate page with the checks on. You want to know those off by heart. And by doing those then, and having it that way, it's not a case of being rigid and not being able to be creative, because what it does is it means that you are able to devote your brain power to other things. You can just get those checks out the way, and you've done those, and you can then concentrate, in the case of an engine fire, on actually think about how am I going to find a place for this aircraft to land and get down, rather than thinking, hang on, which switch am I supposed to switch off next, and how do I stop the fuel to the to that engine that's on fire, and all of those things. So checklists are very powerful in all sorts of aspects, and business is no exception. So one of the takeaways from the sessions this morning might be about thinking, where would it be appropriate to have some specific checks? Because part of checks are the timing. When do you do it? So the pre-flight checks, obviously, that's the moment you do them, is pre-flight. So you do those, and then at a different point, you get in the cockpit. Now I know I'm doing this next set of checks. Well, it's the same within business. So think about how checklists might be useful to you. Because of part of the work we've done with understanding the challenges around scaling up, and knowing that at those different stages there are specific things that we need to look at, allows us to start to think about developing the checklist. So we know that our key focus as we scale up changes. So early on, then essentially our key strategic focus is around making sure we got product market fit, and we've got a scalable business model. And essentially, as a business owner, we've got to basically roll our sleeves up, get down and dirty, and do a lot of the work. But then as we start to have some success, we need to think about getting more reliable and repeatable lead generation activities, for example, in place, so that we've got a nice constant stream of leads coming in. And we need to start, as a leader, focusing on where we might add most value and delegate the things that we don't need to do. Now, I'm not going to go through the detail of these, because I say you can request our ScaleUp Challenges report, and we'll be delighted to send that to you. But what it has enabled us to do then is to think about, okay, well, those 4 pillars, what's the right frequency to be having a look at some of these things, and what should we be doing within each of those pillars to know that we're doing the strategy right? What the things we're missing within strategy, or the people, or the execution, or the cash. And as I say, it's about habits, as I said earlier, and that's what we've done with the InFlight Checks. Now, this is, we've got the InFlight Checks on our 90-day planning software, and Sam is going to go through some more detail of this and later. But this is from Sam's team, and you can see that the output from this has enabled each of his team members. So Granger was talking about the power of other people kind of doing these checks as well. This enables you to see the output from some of the key aspects from each of his team members. And of course, what that means is you can go, well, actually, it looks like everybody reckons we're a bit weak, maybe on being focused on valuable growth here. So what does that mean? So let's have a look at the detail of what that means. And that might be a priority area that we need to focus on. But equally, you might look in other places and go, well, there's somebody out here that thinks we're quite good at business development activities, providing a predictable stream of on-profile clients, but the rest of us don't. So what's the reason for that discrepancy there? And is that maybe something we need to think about as well? So it highlights areas that we might need to think about either discussing more and working more, or that we might need to think about actually putting some improvement initiatives in place. So Sam's going to talk a little bit more about how he uses those within his business in just a moment. So that's really what I wanted to talk through from my perspective. So it's about where might checklists be appropriate for you within your business, but also then specifically we'll have a look at the in-flight checks and see if those going through this exercise throws up some areas that we might need to be thinking about next and prioritizing in order to improve our business. So what I'd like to do now is to hand over to Sam for a few minutes, if I may. So Sam runs the SL shop, which is Europe's leading Mercedes SL classic car business, both in terms of sales, restorations, but also in terms of parts. It's a sizable business. He's built a great business over a few years. And Sam, with over to you, if I may.
There we are. I'm unmuted. Morning, everyone. Kevin, thank you for that. Thank you for today's introduction. I think, I suspect the reason why you've invited me on here is that I am almost evangelical, that's the word, isn't it, about your in-flight checks. And for me, as a business owner, you know, I've owned this business for 15 years. Prior to that, I had a proper job in the corporate world. But for me, through all of the books that I've read, all of the advice that I've taken, all of the growth that I've attempted with my business and with myself, this in-flight check is probably the most powerful tool that I can recommend that you get your head into as a business owner. And for me, what it does, and Kevin touched on it earlier, is it brings together probably the most pertinent, the most important aspects of running your business, and it holds you accountable. That's what's important for me. It holds you accountable. You know what it's like as a self-employed person. Sometimes we fool ourselves that we're doing the right thing. Sometimes we think, yeah, I know what I'm doing. It's all good. It's heading in the right direction. And then you take a cold, hard look at your business with a tool like this, and you say to yourself, actually, I am a bit shit at that side of the business. So we're not quite so good here and not quite so good there. And the other thing is, when you read those kind of business growth books and self-help books and whatever else, you after you read a few of them, you begin to realize that there's a common theme in those books, and there's probably only a certain number of themes that get repeated through all of the books and YouTube videos and whatever else that you can watch. And what Kevin and BizSmart has done is condense them all into that single in-flight check, and I think it is a brilliant document to hold us as business owners accountable and to make sure that the business is going in the right direction. Kevin touched earlier on one of our management team's first attempt actually at doing this. We've been doing it, the senior managers, myself and my two colleagues have been doing this for probably 18 months now, but just the last quarter, we all had a go, all sort of 5 or 6 senior folks had a go at it. And it's really interesting to see people's perspective, people's personality is very different. And Kevin touched on one of those people who were further out on the sales side. I think it was lead generation side. Well, it won't surprise anybody to know that was the sales manager. So the sales manager is really confident in his lead generation, and then the finance people are less confident in it all. So when you do give the task to your wider team, you begin to understand not only probably some of the personalities and how people view things, but also, you know, where those themes are, and if any aspect of your management team are deluded about what they're achieving, this kind of brings everybody back down to earth. And, you know, those of us that have got a sort of a sales and marketing drive tend to be more optimistic than those, the sort of finance accounting that tend to be more pessimistic with their scores. But like I said, for me, it is an amazing tool that absolutely brings everything back down to earth. And you know what it's like when you're running your business. You as the Scale Up pillars show, you've got loads of energy, you can disrupt the market, you think your ideas are better than anyone else's, and you form great relationships with customers and staff. And then over time, as the business grows, those core things that got you off the ground and got your business running, you begin to sometimes lose sight of. You sometimes lose sight of the connection you've got with the staff and ultimately the connection you've got with your customers. So, for example, for me, one of the really important bits I like is the people section, because it just, again, brings me back down to earth. And I ask myself some of these questions, do I really clearly communicate, the core values to all staff? Does everybody feel it? Can everybody recall them? Does everybody know how we're doing on a performance basis, month on month, quarter on quarter? And the answer quite often is no, we don't. I don't include the staff as much as I could, as I'd like to. So, I mean, I picked one at one side there, and we can look at the strategy and execution, but cash, for example, all that kind of stuff is my personal weakness. I've got a right-hand lady, Sue, who's absolutely brilliant at the administration and the accounts and the cash side of the business. And she's always challenging me if I can remember the 7 levers. I can't remember the bloody 7 levers. That's her job. But for me, she probably wouldn't know what one of our key customers looks like. So that's kind of my job. So we come together as a team, and this document holds the whole business accountable to what we should be doing. I think it is probably one of the best tools that I've come across in the 15 years that I've been running the business. I think it's absolute genius. I really do. And Kevin hasn't paid me to say that, although you can get me a pint if you want to, Kevin.
I'm sure we could do that, Sam. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. Really, really, really appreciate that. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for sharing that. What do we think, Matt? Buzz B, maybe? Checks?
Sure. I thought that InFlight Checks was so valuable. In fact, that is what was the catalyst for me to join the Elevate program at the time. We met at that hotel and went through the checklist. And then when I had a look at the score, and there were glaring areas that needed attention. So that was the catalyst to go. And I've just had a look through. I did, as you suggested, is run it again this morning. Happily, it was almost it was identical score-wise to what I did in October 21. So at least we haven't gone backwards there. But from the first one, which was March 20, when I did the first one, it was like 52.5%, and we're at sort of 69 now. So there's clearly been improvement. But what the challenge I find is, I'll go through the questions, and on some days it's a 3, and other days when I'm a bit sort of more fired up, or maybe it might be a 4 or something like that. And I think the challenge for me is to find when I'm in the right mood and right time, so that I can have that sort of consistency of that scoring, because it could be up and down. But every time I've revisited it, it has really challenged to go back and think about really how we're performing in that particular sector. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I think it really works well.
All right.
But what I need to do, and we haven't done, and it came out of the one I've just done last night, was that is we're not incorporating it into our 90 days to take one of the pillars and saying, right, let's grab one of the things from one of the pillars and actually work on that. So, that's something that I'm really going to try and get to grips with on the next Smart 90.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. You covered a lot of things in there. Paul, anything what would you add around the checklist and InFlight Checks?
I think it's a good reminder. It's like when I do the InFlight checklist, it's obviously a bit of a reminder of like, we used to do that well and we've fallen off track with it, or there's stuff in there that with a fresh pair of eyes every quarter is kind of like, that's now become more important. I think where it's really helped us is we've actually, for the first time, set our 90-day plan around the weakest pillar. So kind of having gone through it as a team, everybody completed it. And then you can see like the peaks and like the anomalies where, somebody scores it really high and somebody scores it really low. But because it gives you an average, we decided that execution was our weakest area. So all of the goals and all the Smart 90 actions have been based around trying to actually complete some things. There's a lot of thinking and not a lot of doing strategically. So it's trying to get that stuff done. But, it's really good, I think, as well, for team alignment to just understand that I think we're great at some things and other people who aren't involved in that won't know. So it's a good opportunity to share as well and say this is what we're doing in those areas. So I think it gives the whole team visibility of what it takes as well to run a company, that it's not just the delivery part, there's the finance part and everything else. So I think it's a great tool for trying to plan what the strategic next step is, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Super. Thank you, Paul. Okay, Faith.
We've just got the team to do it, actually. So we've got to put the results in. So that'll be interesting. But I think, I definitely agree with what Paul's saying. So we found when we first started doing this that, number one, a few people were a bit confused around kind of what the questioning was, or what, do you know what I mean? There's some things in there that obviously at our level, it all makes a bit more sense than when you then put it down to the team level. As long as we talked them through it and then they got it. But initially it was a bit like a misunderstanding, I suppose. And then, again, it really opened our eyes in terms of what other people's view was. So, for instance, when we did it as a management team, finance scored really low with some of those senior managers, but finance scored really high with others. And then you think, well, because of the nature of what finance is and how confidential a lot of it is, some people will obviously have an understanding of what they're doing and they're doing it well and they're on top of it, and other people will just not. It won't, as Paul said, it doesn't really enter their head how much is involved in that role. So it's been really interesting to kind of, and then it's a balance of trying to get finance not to take that personally when they come out like that. So it's definitely good, but it comes with, you've just got to kind of monitor how you're using it and who you're using it with to get the best out of it. It's definitely a really good tool.
Quite interesting that you mentioned finance. We had Sam Bailey from the SL Shop, who is a real advocate of the InFlight Checks. He gave a little talk, a presentation at the ScaleUp Club on Tuesday, and he showed his spider chart of people's scores, and there was one that was much greater on marketing on the kind of business development marketing type pillars than the other people on the senior leadership team. And he said it's no surprise that was the head of marketing that scored it. It's like, but it's like, because but actually there's a message in there, isn't there? Because if we as the business leader do it, we might think that everybody knows our core values, all of these great things, and they know the strategy, they know the priorities, all of those great things, because we've set them, we're in it every day and all of those. But actually, if we ask other people, maybe they're not quite as clear as we think they are. Good. All right. Matthew Parsons, anything you'd like to add?
I suppose I would resonate with Matt and with Faith, really. I think it's great to identify areas of improvement. It got me thinking about improvements I can do within this business as well, knowing that it's a living, moving, changing organism, isn't it, business? It doesn't care if you hit 5 in one quarter, it's going to be 5 the next. So again, I think it's important to definitely understand that. I've not involved my team so much into it, obviously, because we're still quite a small team. But I can definitely see the benefits of getting other people's views into the business, but also giving them a bit of an insight into the business isn't simply a supply and get paid. No business works in that fashion. There's lots of different facets, and getting them to understand it better will certainly, I think, get them a bit more respect for what it takes to really grow and lead the charge within the business, really.
Yeah, I think that's another really good point. And in the Checklist Manifesto that I mentioned, that book, that's one of the things he really pulls out, is that checklists are much more powerful when there's somebody else, there's more than one person involved, right? Because you can imagine, I might walk up to my aircraft. I know the in-flight checks inside out. I know my aircraft, and I go, yeah, all that's fine, and off I go to the next stuff. Whereas if I've got somebody that's actually with me, that's going, right, let's check. Did you check that one properly, or and it's just that extra pair of eyes and thought, and stops you skimping things. And in the case of something like the in-flight checks, then of course you are checking on other people's views of it as well. So as you say, you can spot any real differences of understanding, but also any areas where you all think you're weak or strong or whatever. Good. Peter, what about maybe not just the in-flight checks, but what about checklists in general? Do you use checklists in other aspects of your business?
I always have, but we've started rolling them out to the team, especially now we've hired an ops person. So part of their role has been kind of creating checklists for delivery, for launching, onboarding customers. And actually it's worked really well because it gives very clear direction for the team members to know what they're doing. And we know that all the individual parts of that are actually being achieved. And that's kind of meant that we're able to get more done when things are kind of falling through the gaps, which they potentially were before, I guess. So yeah, I'm quite a big fan of checklists. I think it's really about getting people to hopefully create their own, but then agreeing and sharing them with the team. And then it's really about using them. That's the biggest challenge is, once you've kind of created that culture of using checklists, then they do, that they have a big impact on kind of what you're doing.
And that, there's some more really good points in there. And that was one of the other things that Atul Gawande was mentioning, was that you've got to have an instant for a checklist approach to work. You've got to have an instance at a point at which it's relevant to do a particular checklist, and then you can build it into a habit. If it's just like, well, we'll do it occasionally or what, or whatever, it doesn't work. But if it's like, as we imagine, you're walking up to the aeroplane, you're going to do your walk around checks, right? Et cetera, or in our case, Caroline, working with us in the office, picked up the fact that we've just done ScaleUp Club. We should have a checklist for all of the actions that we do straight after ScaleUp Club. And the other thing that you mentioned is that it not only does it save us time, but the other thing is that it actually frees up our brain capacity. And if you think about a pilot flying, fine, with the walk around checks, you might well get out a little booklet that's got the checks in it and you read through them. But when you're up and flying and you've got an engine fire, you are not going to want to shuffle around to try and find the right page as to where the in-flight checklists are and have your head down in the cockpit and read you need to memorize those. You need to have those absolutely off pat. But the beauty of that is you're not then, once you've got those in off pat, you're not using brain power to think about flying the airplane and finding somewhere you're not losing brain power, wondering how do I shut that engine down or what's the next step I do to minimize the fire. You just rattle those checks off, which gives you all that free capacity left to concentrate on what you need to do to make the airplane safe, get it down safely, and all of those things. So it frees up brain capacity and creative thinking, I think, as well, which may not be an obvious thing you think about with checklists. Did I make sense with that, or did I completely confuse people? We got a little kitten next to Paul. Look at that. Whee. Good. Okay, Lisa, anything you'd add?
No, not really. I sort of agree with the others. I mean, as an industry, we've always used checklists for either onboarding or processes for CRMs, quality checking. I do agree that actually it allows focus. The good thing about getting the team to do it once a quarter is it can also identify actually, is it a training issue for an individual? Do they just not understand that certain element of the checklist, or is it a bigger company-wide issue that actually we're not delivering what we think we're delivering? Yeah,
good, excellent. Yeah, very good stuff. And Stu, anything? Newest member to the group, but anything you'd add to the idea of checks?
No, except I think that. I don't use them particularly in my business because it is just me, and therefore, but obviously I use the smart checklist, and I think the thing that I think one of the interesting things for me, I've just gone back through, following ScaleUp, I went back through the last 3 ones I did online, so it's the easiest one to track. And actually, while my scores have significantly improved, all I've done is actually work on the stuff that I was probably doing reasonably well anyway, and not actually. So I've done the typical sort of ostrich thing of actually throwing my head in the sand about the one thing that I'm not very good at, and actually really kind of worked to improve on that. So I think kind of one of the things for me is actually looking at actually where am I weakest, right? How do I need to improve in that score? Now I've got all the others up to a point where actually I'm really comfortable. So, and it also depends for me, particularly on kind of what's my focus for that quarter. And obviously it's been a lot for years, about kind of like getting the Nexus program launched, getting manifesto communicated, some of the strategic and the marketing side of things. Whereas actually I've left the money side of things to kind of just trot along on their own, and that's actually where I'm in the early week. So that's my challenge, I think, for the next 90 days is to pull my score up significantly in that particular pillar.
Yeah. So, and there's a good message in there as well. A couple of good messages, and we've got to prioritize. You've got. Let's just take the InFlight Checks. There's I think 130 questions or 130 points on it. You would not, we would not expect you to be working across those 130 things at one go. First of all, the stages of the business life cycle, like on the scale-up journey, where some elements are going to be more important than others anyway. But obviously, there's particular aspects of your business, timings, whatever, that would mean that some things are more important than others. And that's another part of the idea, really, of having more than one person's head involved in thinking about this, is that we can then prioritize what we think is most important. So it's not necessarily that was the lowest score one for all of us, because it could be that was the lowest score one, but actually it won't make much of a difference right now at the stage of business we're at if we work on that. Yeah. So it's not a case of just pick the lowest one and do that. It's a combination of where do we think if we made an improvement, where's an improvement possible? If we made that improvement, would that make an impact on the business now and be important with the stage that we're at? So yeah, I think that's in terms of our InFlight checklist. That's the way to look at it. Obviously, with different types of checklists, then there's different reasons for having them. But that's the way to use the InFlight checks. Identify then at least probably one key thing that you're then going to do and really focus on and improve. Right, Louise, anything you want to add to?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that Paul said, because it was what I'd written down, because we sometimes focus on constantly improving all the scores. But one of the things that the InFlight checklist is really good at is just catching us when we start to slip. And by doing it sort of quarterly, or even some people do it even more regularly, but it catches us. So we are striving to improve all the time, but we're small businesses. We can't focus on everything all of the time. And what the InFlight checklist is very good at is catching us when we slip. We did exactly that. At the end of last year, we did our InFlight checklist for not this quarter, but the previous quarter. And it identified that our business rhythm was not where we wanted it to be. The team looked at it and went, actually, we had a good business rhythm, but we brought new people in, we've changed a few things around, and actually we're slipping a bit on that. So it wasn't a case of us, sort of going, oh God, we're terrible at that. It's just a case of a quick reminder, hang on a minute, you've allowed that to just slip a bit. Put a little bit extra effort in driving it forward. So, it's not just about the constant strive for high scores, because you'll get to a certain point and once you've got 100%, you can't get any higher, can you? But it will catch you as you start to slip, which is an important point.
And if we're on our own in the business, then clearly there's a limited number of things that we can do. So I'd probably be suggesting, right, you know what, just pick one of those 130 points, if you like, and focus on, add that as your improvement initiative. Don't try and do too much. If you've got a larger team of people, then you might want to think about knocking off several things in that quarter, because you can do that. You've got different teams and different priorities. In fact, one of the other things that Sam Bailey says that he does is he's now allocated somebody to be responsible for each of the 4 pillars. So there's somebody that is looking after the people measures, somebody that's looking after the strategy measures, somebody that's looking after the execution measures, and somebody looking after the cash. And it's their role to work out what the improvement initiatives are that need to be done, and to basically be accountable for all of the sub points and the questions within each of those pillars. So that might be something to think about for those of you with larger teams, more people involved in your businesses. I don't know, Steve, anything you'd like to raise to the discussion, Steve?
Yeah, they're absolutely crucial for obtaining consistent service, really. So any installation that we do, part of the actual specification of it is building a checklist. So even a bespoke installation will have a checklist to make sure we've delivered what the customer has specified. Things for building new machines, again, we have a checklist. So we're pretty sort of heavy on checklists in our business because it basically allows us to give consistent service. One thing to say about the sort of meetings, etc., and constant checklists, we actually have checklists to check off that we've had meetings as well, because especially when the day gets busy and when systems get stretched, that's when you find that those things stop getting done. And we also do them for our customers when we're doing implementations as well, to make them do it. It sort of gives accountability, really. So it's a great way of doing that.
Fantastic. Good. Thanks. David Nicholas, what would you add to the conversation on?
Well, obviously, from our perspective, checklists are really important. However, we fail to apply the concept from our product, which we've got loads of checklists on, to then the processes within the business.
Right.
We have started to improve to a degree. I mean, regarding the meeting side of things, we do have started to have regular meetings, but we don't necessarily use that as an A1 discipline within the business, although we are improving. And I'm hoping to use that as a seed, really, for everything else regarding checklists. So we're really good when it comes to our product, when it comes to checklists, obviously checking it, making sure it works, testing it, but not so good when it comes to the people side of it.
All right.
Looking to improve.
Good stuff. Claire, what would you add?
Yeah, so obviously for implementations of contracts, we have checklists. So we have an Excel spreadsheet, and we basically fill it out, send it to the client, what we expect of them, what they expect of us, and every single time it's updated, we resend it so everyone knows where they are with the ticks and what we're waiting on. I guess everybody follows the same checklist process because we have ISO flows, so that's quite handy when you bring on new people because they all follow the same process, so everyone gets the same service. And then we have for our agency team, we have this guide, it's like the Bible of do's and don'ts and rules and regs, and then each contract client's information, so everybody can kind of look up that, and it's also embedded into the online systems that we use, so everyone kind of doesn't look stupid with the client. And then regarding what you were saying about the actual InFlight checklist, so we had a call last week, so I went through and did that, and obviously from my perspective it's all tickety-boo apart from a couple of bits. So now I've got Charlotte back from maternity leave. I'm going to involve her now and get her to do it as well once she's back and settled.
Brilliant. Good stuff. Hannah, what would you bring to the party?
I would say we're strong around checklists to do with client activity. So obviously the implementation of client activity on a weekly and a monthly basis, and we have consistent things that we adhere to for obviously like a consistent service, but we probably lack in checklists around actual maybe like business activity, not from an accountancy perspective actually, but maybe from a more operational perspective, and staff management, which I think need improving.
Okay. All right. Good. Nigel?
I mean, good and bad, really. I think some bits we do quite well, and other bits we do far less well. I think we do. I write copious amounts of lists. I have a daily list, a weekly list, and it goes on and on and on. One of the things that's come to that might be worth mentioning is we nobody ever seems to critique the list, why we're actually doing what we're doing. They follow the list, it's laid out, and they follow it religiously. But nobody ever says, we could do that better. Have we ever thought of doing this? And that really irritates me, that does that. That's just, but I think Claire mentioned it about the ISO flows and that sort of thing. As we're new to ISO 9001, we've put a lot of work into getting our Google Docs right. So we're sharing all these, in effect, spreadsheets or flowcharts or whatever else. But then somebody just say, what, you know, surely somebody should critique it and say, if we did that, the whole thing would work better.
Yeah.
And you don't really seem to get that feedback sometimes. They go, well, I followed the process. And you just go, but there you go.
Everybody got any thoughts on that?
Inundated, I'd say.
Yeah, Claire.
No, I was just going to say, so one of the things we say to people at interview is, obviously we train you and we take you through all the processes and procedures, but as you progress here, if you spot something that would increase efficiency, would be good for a client or whatever, always shout up. So, and then we try and implement whatever they've said straight away. So people always do come up with things and say, well, why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it that way? We never have that saying, it's because we've always done it that way.
Yeah.
I'm envious.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, we in the InFlight checks themselves, there is a check. A question is, are we having our stop, start, continue discussions? And that would be potentially one aspect of that. In general, are there some things, and it could be to do with our checks or something else, but are there things that we're doing that actually we should just stop doing because it's not working, or should we improve? I also wonder, and it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but maybe on the last check on a checklist should be, did this checklist work? I mean, it would not hurt, would it? It could be on every single checklist that you've got. If that's the final question, did this work? Is there anything that didn't or could be improved on it? And then you've got that constant improvement feedback loop in for your ISO and everything else.
Yeah, that's what they do in ISO as well. So our internal audits will go, why are we doing this? Let's do this. And they're called observations, aren't they? Or recommendations for improvement. And the auditors do that as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
I do think it is, I'll just bring up the idea of process mapping because you're talking about, do you go back and check the things that you're doing and are you doing the right things in the right order? So, and process mapping is something that we can bring up in a future thing, but it's essentially you map the current process, then you take a look at it and say, does this work? So it's a bit like going through the existing checklist and saying, this is the existing things that we do. And this is what we actually do. And then you look at that and say, well, okay, so how can we do that better? And interestingly, just talking about the SL shop and they've taken, if you like, this to the next stage with process mapping. And we've just done 2 great exercises and come up with some phenomenal changes to the process. And actually the areas of process that changed or needed to change were not the ones that the team thought when they first sat down and looked at it. Now, they thought the problem was here. And actually, if we put something in here, the whole of this went away. So just getting the idea of, sorry, yeah, David. Yeah.
I was going to say, that's really useful. I mean, I've always done that throughout my career. It gives you the opportunity to be able to visualize what the process looks like. It allows you to be able to, the whole team to see the full map of the processes. And just like anything else, if you go from A to B all the time, this way, that way, then you only know that way. But then if you actually take a diversion and look around and open up space, you can see the opportunities where the shortcuts are that you didn't think they were there before. And the main benefit of that is then you get an agreement on how it should be done moving forward. And that's fundamentally what this is all about, I believe.
Absolutely fundamental. And that was one of the real benefits that came out of bringing these teams together. They were all doing their own thing along this process, and none of them understood what effect it had on the other. And the light bulb moment that was around the table when they suddenly realized, and great. I mean, all of a sudden we took a process that was taking this long and it's now this short. And then what's more is that brought the team together and they're really excited about working together to make it work. So that just sort of brings that loop together.
Another opportunity, as well as doing that as a proactive exercise, another opportunity is when something goes wrong. So if there's a kind of, say, a fault or a defect or something's gone wrong, whether that's in service delivery or a machine's broken down or products failed, is to actually do root cause analysis. So in engineering terms, it's a very well established principles where you can actually break it down to what is it that actually failed that led to that eventual bad outcome. And kind of build that into any sort of processes that you might have for putting things right. So, you know, and just including that automatically. So when something goes wrong, obviously dealing with the immediate aftermath, but then going back and say, well, okay, let's see what actually failed. And you know, the 5 whys, you know, have to keep asking the same question over and over again, you know, ask why. Well, why did that happen? And then you answer that and then sort of do that up to 5 times.
Yeah, very, very good. And, you know, if we go back to the flying example, then of course every time there's an incident, then there is a review that will automatically happen by an independent body that will then make recommendations that will no doubt then be incorporated where appropriate into any particular processes or checklists that happen. So yes, you might not go fully to getting the CAA or equivalent into having a look at your processes, but yes, that sort of idea I think is good. All right. Any other thoughts on our checklists?
Yeah, I would just add. I mean, for us, we use checklists a lot with clients, because a lot of the time after we've got a company up and running, we're then checking to see how well are they conforming to, you know, systems that we've set up for them, and also how well are they complying with the law. So to really have quite comprehensive checklists in that regard. And actually, when we were developing our software safety box, one of the key functionalities on there is monitoring. Right. So, you know, how do you, you know, so on a monthly basis, you audit against the checklist. So, and the most recent developments on that, initially we developed that functionality where we uploaded a number of templates that clients could use, which were preloaded. But the most recent developments, we actually gave them the functionality to develop their own checklists. So that's gone down really well. So they've got exactly the same functionality that we have as kind of administrators of the software.
Excellent. Okay, good. So so find the appropriate time when checklists might work. It's one of the key takeaways by the sounds of it. Also, building in a constant review process. In addition, ideally having more than one person with eyes on that checklist so that you get the combined thinking and also that accountability that might come out of it. And with regards to the in-flight checks themselves, then we structured those according to the 4 pillars of scaling up: strategy, people, execution, and cash. We know that the things within there that we've included within there, we've collated from all sorts of best practice, and they make up a really good set of things that if you gradually improve on those, then we know we're building a more resilient, more scalable, and ultimately a more valuable business. So that's what it's there for. What it's not there for is for trying to do 130 different things at once. The idea is to look at it. You might go, oh look, we all agree we're weak in that area, but even that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a priority area, because you might go, actually, you know what, we accept that we're a bit weak there. It's not so important right now. We've got other fires to put out, or we've got other things that are a bit more important right now. So we'll acknowledge the fact that we're a bit weak on it, but there is another area that actually we'll work on a bit more. So within the smaller businesses, it's probably a case of doing this once a quarter and identifying maybe one initiative that you're going to add in as a kind of business improvement initiative. In a larger business where you've got a team of people, you might be able to identify several improvement initiatives that you can work on in that quarter, that might make sense, because you've got different people that can be accountable for making sure that they happen. And in fact, one of the other things that came out of Sam Bailey's presentation was the fact that he's allocated an individual to each of those 4 pillars. So he's taken on the people pillar, and he owns that, if you like. So he's the one that then will look after and make sure that they're doing everything they can to improve their people score, essentially. But other people have been allocated the accountability for the different pillars. So that might be another way to think about looking at them. Don't forget to take a look at www.bizsmarts.co.uk to access a great range of resources to help you in your scale-up journey. So that's bizsmarts.co.uk, which is bizsmarts.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.